Hey there, you are listening to the Traill Happy Box Hour, broadcasting through the facilities of Trent Radio at 92.7 CFFF FM in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. My name is Amanda Owen, and joining me this week is Meghan Ward. And we're going to take a quick break to play April Snow by Melody Ryan.
April snow, heavy eyes, heavy heart, tail lights, dry, run till snow melts to rain, warms my heart, soothes this pain. Far away, does it really matter if I'm me when I return? There's still so many questions and lessons I've yet to learn. Like can a garden still grow when April showers are made of snow? And can love grow without light? April snow, hotel bed, closed curtains, hide my head. Dream of love, dream of loss, dream of emptiness, dream of us. Far away, does it really matter if I'm me when I return? There's still so many questions and lessons I've yet to learn. Like can a garden still grow when April showers are made of snow? And can love grow without light? Oh, but does it really matter if I'm me when I return? There's still so many questions and lessons I've yet to learn. Like can a garden still grow when April showers are made of snow? And can love grow without light? Without light.
And that was April Snow by Melody Ryan. And you may be wondering what's going on at the college on the Hill. Traill College cabinet elections are currently ongoing. Voting opened this morning at 9 a.m., and you have until March 31st at 9 a.m. to cast your ballot. Be sure to cast your ballot and read more information about the nominees on the Traill College Cabinet website. More information can be found by searching Traill College Cabinet on the Trent University website. Lifelong learners can expand their minds and gain new skills through Trent University's Spring 2022 continuing education offerings, which are fully online. Registrations are now open, and you can learn more at trentu.ca/continuing education. Are you looking for a fun evening of grad trivia? Then look no further. On April 7th, there will be a Canadian Studies and general knowledge trivia going on. Join via Zoom. More information can be found in the Traill Tales newsletter. And now I'll now pass it off to Megan.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining me today. You're listening to Traill College's Happy Box Hour radio on 92.7 FM Trent Radio. We're changing up our podcast program a little bit today to share some of the work that the science communication class at Trent University has been doing on invasive wild pigs in Canada. My name is Meghan Ward, and joining us today is Colin, Ivy, Bradley, and Madeline. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Do you guys want to take maybe a minute or two and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi. So we're a group of students from the Communications and Conservation Biology course at Trent, and we're really excited to have the opportunity to come on the air today and talk to you about invasive wild pigs in Canada.
I'm really excited too. Obviously, from the intro, you guys have heard that this is sort of the first time we're bringing a class into chat, and it's not just one grad student. So we do have a group of people here. So hopefully our listeners are a little excited for a bit of a change in our program. So just to sort of start off this conversation about invasive wild pigs, can you guys explain what it means for a species to actually be invasive?
Yeah. So what an invasive species is when a species is brought over to a novel environment, so something that they've never been introduced in history, basically. This new environment is not well adapted to them. They sometimes will be able to thrive in this environment without new predators or anything to control their population. What ends up happening is that when these new species to the environment end up outcompeting the native wildlife, they start becoming more of a problem and end up impacting local ecosystems and populations there.
Right, okay. So it sounds like we kind of have to know a bit about the history of the wild pigs to determine if they'll be invasive. So does someone want to take a minute or a couple of minutes and give us sort of an overview of the pigs and what their history is like?
Yeah, so the wild pigs, which are just considered any pig that's not in domesticated farms, they were brought over from Spain back when, historically, when the Americas were colonized, and they were bringing over wild livestock and wildlife that way. That's how they first were introduced to this new area. So they've been around for a few hundred years. However, only recently have it started to become a more larger problem as they've started to become more and more populated and becoming more of an impact on local areas. So an issue that's come up recently is actually when domesticated pigs end up escaping or end up breeding with the wild pigs. These offspring actually have the best traits that they can have for this environment. They're much larger, they're much more aggressive, they're much more dominant in their social structures, making them more of a better suit for their environment. The thing to know about them is that they haven't become hugely established here in Ontario. However, in other areas of even in America and in Canada, so Saskatchewan and I believe Texas also have a big issue with the wild boars there. So it's completely out of control, and it's costing them millions of dollars a year just to keep them in control as they are now before they get any more worse than they already are.
Right. So when we're talking about invasive wild pigs, you mentioned sort of historically they came over as cattle or as livestock. but now they're not. So do we talk about domesticated pigs and farm pigs also as well, or is it two separate things?
Yeah, so the term wild pigs is a general term used to describe the invasive wild boars, escaped domestic pigs, and hybrids of the two. But we're specifically talking about invasive Eurasian boars.
Okay. And so just a little aside, when we talk about hybrid pigs, we've had a couple grad students who've been on the podcast before who've talked about a hybrid. When I think of hybrid, I kind of think like a car, like you have like the electric bit and then you also have the gas. Is that the same thing with a hybrid pig where it's kind of the two different species coming together? Is that what you mean by hybrid?
Yeah, so we have the domesticated farm pig that you might think of, and then they breed with the invasive boar. And yeah, they have that hybrid like you're talking about.
Oh, okay, interesting. Perfect. Well, thank you for clearing that up. Are there any other sort of pieces of information or misinformation, for example, like the domesticated versus the wild pig? Is there any of that floating around about the invasive wild pigs that maybe we should clarify before we continue?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces of misinformation. So one of the biggest one is that the pigs are just farm animals. So they're actually not like the farm pigs that we have here. They're not actually domesticated at all. They were originally brought over to be used as an exotic meat, but the species itself is not domesticated, even though it can breed with the domesticated pigs. Another piece is that we can just hunt them to get rid of them. This might seem like an easy fix, although hunting is not a good solution, as pigs are actually really smart and they're highly adaptable. So when you hunt a pig, it normally targets one at a time. And then that leaves the rest of the group because they do travel in groups alive. So they will then flee, learn from that experience, and then they'll become more hunter avoidant in the future. And this makes them really hard to track and capture them in the future so that we can properly remove them. And then another one is just that natural predators would get them. So because they're not from here and they are invasive, they don't have any established predator like in the food chain. So this means that when there are wild populations, their numbers are not decreasing naturally. And sorry, even if natural predators wanted to start hunting them, they're hard prey to catch as they will fight back, and mother pigs will actually protect their young against the predators. So this might deter them from hunting them in the future.
Right. So it's kind of like a wolf pack where like the young and like the old go in the middle and then all the strong like protect them, that kind of thing. And it's interesting you brought up how smart they are, because I feel like sometimes you see those like videos on YouTube or TikTok of like people who own micro pigs and they say they're like incredibly intelligent, like super easy to train, smarter than dogs. So it's kind of taking that like really extreme intelligence and pairing it with like an aggressive invasive species. So it makes it very difficult to control that kind of species when, like, as you said, like a couple rounds of being hunted teaches them what to avoid and how to recognize it. So that's very interesting that you brought that up. So kind of now that we're all sort of on the same page and our listeners have an idea of the misinformation surrounding invasive wild pigs, do you guys want to take some time and talk about the potential damages and threats that are caused? I know, Colin, you said that in the States, it costs like millions of dollars a year to fix. So what are the potential damages and threats that we may see here, either in Ontario or in Canada, caused by those kind of pigs?
Yeah, for sure. So, when we're looking at potential damages caused by wild pigs or any species for that matter, generally, a financial impact is considered a bottom line for assessing damages. Most of the studies I was able to find had better metrics for the United States, so I'll focus probably a bit more on the damage caused down there. But the estimate for the US is that they roughly lose $2.5 billion per year, and Canada is estimated to lose $1.5 billion per year, right? Which adds up to a pretty significant amount of money lost each year. So then you might be wondering, how can wild pigs cause this kind of damage? So for starters, wild pigs are known to move in groups. They're called sounders, and they can contain, roughly about 20 individuals on average. But sounders of over 50 individuals have been reported in the past. And, you got to imagine that adults of the species are known to weigh between, 75 to 250 pounds, which gives them quite a bit of strength behind their actions and making it so, they really do have to eat quite a bit to fuel their massive bodies. Most of their destructive behavior stems from their foraging behavior and diet. In particular, wild pigs are considered to be opportunistic omnivores, meaning that they have a wide-ranging diet and are willing to eat almost anything they could, get their snouts into. A 2013 study I read found that 90% of their diet is plant matter, less than 2% is animal matter, and the remaining 1 to 7% is other biological material or inorganic material, or any kind of garbage or excess waste. But in spite of this, I've actually found some recordings, of wild pigs preying on animals, whether that's deer fawns or the calves of cattle and other small adolescent animals. When you look at this foraging behavior, they utilize something called rooting, trampling, and wallowing, which is essentially just behavior where they can use their snout and teeth to dig for underground food or trample down the surrounding areas. In doing so, they've reportedly overturned croplands and pastures and meadows to the point where it can be challenging for even impossible for farmers to drive a tractor over the field. This highly destructive behavior can kill many native or desired plant species. It encourages the growth of undesired weeds and invasive species. And additionally, the trampling and erosion and wallowing can cause erosion or impact water quality and just degrade natural areas. When we look at this property damage, it's generally more prevalent in rural communities where pigs are known to break irrigation lines or rip down any kind of specialized structures or equipment associated with farmings. Damages to vehicles have also been documented. Transitioning onto how they interact with disease. Parasites, viruses, and diseases are another big threat that wild pigs pose to not just domestic livestock and wildlife, but even to humans. Wild pigs as a whole, globally, I guess speaking about the species, they're known to host at least 30 viral and bacterial diseases and at least 40 parasites, all of which can be successfully transmitted to at least one of the aforementioned groups. Another 2017 study I read found that roughly 87% of these parasites, viruses, or diseases could really cause long-term damage in any of those categories. And due to climate change, this threat is predicted to increase within the wild pigs, as they and other species are looking to expand their range and will ultimately come into contact with new species or populations. When we're specifically looking at the spread of disease between livestock, pets, or other domestic animals with wild pigs, we can see that this will occur in two major ways, either through direct contact with the feral swine or its fecal matter, or through sharing contaminated feeding or watering containers. We consider domestic pigs and cattle to be at particular risk of contracting these diseases, illnesses, or parasites due to relatedness between the species. After which there are also concerns that interactions between wild pigs and this livestock could result in the spread of new diseases or even reintroduce diseases that have been eradicated within the domestic pig industry. And if you look at what kind of agricultural damage is being done in the US right now, it currently amounted to $2.5 billion per year. But if we look at the overall state of the domestic pig industry in the US, it's actually worth $34 billion per year. So even if only a fraction of the farms are damaged by this disease, there could still be some significant economic impacts. And finally, when we're looking at the potential spread of disease from wild pigs and humans, we can see that it comes from primarily from the consumption of undercooked pig meat. As a result, hunters and their friends and family are disproportionately affected. If you're working with wild pig meat, we recommend that you use gloves to handle the carcass and ensure that the internal temperature of the meat is cooked to 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 71 degrees Celsius. And otherwise, the other major risk from comes from interacting with the scat or material that could have come in contact with the pig, which often disproportionately affects younger children who tend to be more touchy-feely.
Hey there, if you are just tuning in, you are listening to the Traill Happy Box Hour, broadcasting through the facilities of Trent Radio at 92.7 CFFF FM in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada.
Wow, I think that's so interesting because I feel like I knew a little bit about wild pigs, like just from being a biology student and reading some papers that I've come across, but I had no idea the length that they could impact humans and other animals and agricultural fields. But also, I think I kind of always assumed they had really destructive behaviors that were outside of their natural foraging. I didn't realize that it was their natural, like just foraging behaviors that were causing such destruction. I thought maybe they were just a really aggressive species. So it's kind of even scarier because in reality, they're not running into houses and knocking them down or running into sheds and knocking them down. They're just doing what they normally would do to survive. And it's having such extreme impacts on humans and landscapes and other species. So thank you for that in-depth reply because, even me as someone who has a little bit of background in invasive pigs really didn't know all of that. So I'm sure our listeners are learning a ton. So what has been done to protect agricultural lands and wildlife if we know that they're going to have such extreme impacts in sort of these two areas, and then I guess diseases as well? Is there legislation involved? Is the government getting involved? Sort of what's happening in Canada and Ontario to address that?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And there's been a lot of work done recently. As of January 1st of this year, the Canadian government officially implemented legislation related to wild pigs at the federal and provincial levels. So federally, Canada now listed wild pigs as an invasive species, and provincially, Ontario came up with a strategy to address the threat of invasive pigs. And it was created to analyze and address the best possible management techniques for the species. The overall goal of both these federal and provincial changes is to prevent the establishment of invasive wild pigs throughout Ontario and hopefully throughout the rest of Canada. These legislative changes are necessary to protect Canadian ecosystems, prevent damages caused by wild pigs, and avoid the potential disease transfer from wild pigs. Four main objectives proposed in the provincial legislation were to prevent the introduction of wild pigs, to address the risk that they pose in Ontario, to use a coordinated approach to effectively remove wild pigs from the environment, and to leverage the expertise and resources from other ministries and jurisdictions. So some changes that have been implemented are that it is now illegal to hunt pigs in Ontario. Pigs are no longer permitted in provincial parks or on conservation reserves, and it is illegal to release any pig into the natural environment. If any pig escapes from a farm or is otherwise released, the owners are responsible for immediately notifying the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources, and Forestry, which was formerly known as MNR, and they are also responsible for trying to capture the pig as soon as possible. Another change that went into effect on January 1st is that the import, possession, transport, propagation, lease, trade, buying, and selling of Eurasian wild boar and all hybrids is strictly prohibited. Anyone who currently possesses Eurasian wild boar or their hybrids is eligible for a 2-year exception period, but they need to contact the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources, and Forestry in order to get that exemption period. And following that period, prohibitions apply to all Ontarians. And these new directions related to the Eurasian wild boar and their hybrids do not apply to domesticated pigs, for example, heritage breeds of pigs and pot-bellied pigs. And the legislation implemented in Ontario and in the rest of Canada is based off of the successful aspects of legislation introduced in Texas and Saskatchewan, which was why collaboration with other ministries and jurisdictions was so important in this process.
Awesome. So it sounds like a lot of that stuff is very recent. Like you were saying, like January, like it hasn't been going on for very long. So hopefully we do see some results of this new like legislation and information that we're providing to the public. So fingers crossed that we see some good results come from that. And just sort of an additional question, Bradley, you had mentioned like people are disproportionately affected. So farmers are impacted, hunters may come across wild pigs when they're hunting, maybe hikers will see them more often. So if someone does see a pig, like if we have an avid hunter or hiker who's listening in on this podcast and they see a wild pig, what should they do? Is there someone they should call? Is there like an email they should try to access? What do you guys think?
Yeah, so there is actually a team specifically for dealing with wild pigs in Ontario. So while it may not be a huge problem like in Saskatchewan or in Texas, we're trying to prevent that from happening. So spending the little bit of time and effort now will be much more worth it so that we don't get to that level and have to put so much more money into it to prevent it happen. But the people that they can contact are, the Wild Pigs Ontario team. You can contact their phone number or their email. They take any sightings. They love to hear any sightings that people may or may not have seen. Some people are just, if you're unsure, you thought you may have seen a boar, or even just the evidence that there was a boar. So like Bradley was saying, any like trampling marks, rooting behavior you see, a lot of dug up ground in a field somewhere. They love to hear this. This is great news for them. They can then start going out, making sure that they can be properly dealt with and effectively removed from the area.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to sort of come here and chat with me and our listeners about invasive wild pigs in Ontario and in Canada. To sort of tie up our podcast today, in like a sentence or two, or maybe three, I can be lenient. Can you guys summarize everything we should know about wild pigs and sort of what we've talked about today?
Yeah, so in summary, wild pigs are an invasive species in Canada. They have the potential to cause significant economic damage. Luckily for us in Ontario, the Ministry of Natural Resources has reports that there is no evidence to suggest that there is an established population of them that are, self-breeding or breeding and self-sustaining. Currently, one of the best ways we can keep it this way is by taking a proactive approach to managing wild pigs and by correcting, general misinformation surrounding the species.
Awesome. Well, Madeline, Ivy, Bradley, and Colin, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. You've been listening to the Traill Happy Box Hour, the grad student podcast series on 92.7 FM Trent Radio. Please feel free to follow us along on our Traill College social media at Traill College. Bye for now.